So I'm delighted now to be joined by 4 terrific faculty members from BU Wheelock for what I hope will feel more like a conversation than a panel. The care, the criticality, the collaboration that they each bring to their scholarship and their teaching is truly extraordinary. And I believe that's what sets BU Wheelock apart from so many of its peers, and also sets us apart as an important leader in this space. So, hello and welcome. This is a moment where many people are speculating about the future of AI, certainly, and the future of education in relation to it. And we heard from Aaron just a little bit ago. We experienced Random Actors' extraordinary performance. And each of you, of course, brings another perspective to the table. So I'd like to invite each of you to introduce yourselves and to share what we might think of as your headline. So briefly, in 1 minute or less, tell us about your imagination for what learning can be, and what might the role of AI be in that imagination. Are you mic'd up?
Good. All right, hello everyone. My name is Naomi Caselli, again, still. And in my corner of the world, I'm thinking about language. And I'm thinking about, as we see the world progress, and with LLMs, and most of that technology that is expecting users to know either written or spoken language, which means that people who use signed languages are discarded, they're left out, they're marginalized. So I have to think about how do we make that technology available and accessible by deaf people? And in some ways, that language-based technology will be a unique modification for the community. And when we think about translation, we think about access, we think about limited access to all kinds of information in the world, mostly which is based on written and spoken language. I think there's huge opportunities, but I also think there's huge risks. Where my research and thinking and exploration goes is how we look at those technologies, how we create those technologies are informed by and for and about the deaf community, and they must be, right, in order for it to work.
Thank you, Naomi. Michael.
Hey everyone, my name is Michael Chang. I'm an assistant professor here. I'm actually a computer scientist by training and decided to come into education because I really cared about a lot of the ethical and political dimensions of the work and the people that I was really cared about in my community. And this question that Penny asked is kind of a meta question for me because I work on a lot of random things, but one of the things I'm most passionate about is working with young people, designing learning spaces for young people to collectively imagine possibilities, ones that are joyful, equitable, that don't look like society or learning spaces as we know now, and really come together and imagine some new possibilities for how that looks like. And this is one of those spaces where a lot of people, there's a lot of excitement around it, and there's a lot of the sense of, wow, there's so many ways that we can engage using AI to make elements of this process faster, help people imagine new things, quicker, faster, bring together all these different ideas. And I think when I hear all these ideas, for me, I think it's a moment that is both, just doesn't quite get at the heart of a lot of the issues. And we need a moment to pause. We need a moment to quickly examine and understand what it is that these problems is, right? Like we can think about using technology and AI to make these speculative processes more efficient, but really we need to take a step back and ask, why is it so hard in the first place for us to imagine systems of schooling that don't create suffering and a lot of pain for a lot of students, but particularly for Black and brown students that we really want to have a good experience in schooling. So all of that is, my work really comes from a lot of different angles, but I'm most excited about speculating about new possibilities, and I think we really need to take a second to pause and explore a lot of the critical and ethical questions that come up as we engage these new technologies in all these different aspects of our society and of our learning spaces.
Michael, we're so glad you came over from CS into education, so glad you're here. Yes, and
So we're still
Nermeen.
introducing ourselves, right? This is
We
just
are
who
absolutely. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Nermeen Dashush. I am a professor of early childhood education, so people sometimes get surprised when they hear early childhood education. We have a little joke. We're like, what are you doing here, girl?
Ariana, what are you doing here, girl?
Because people don't expect early childhood education to be part of this, this conversation, but really at the core of what I do is making sure that my focus is on science education, STEM education, and where I stand here is my work is a lot around AI literacy. That slide that says this work is already outdated. My role is to make sure that they have the skills to, wherever the tool goes, they're able to kind of dissect it and looking at AI literacy. My work examines both in school and for hopefully reasons we'll explore later, the need to explore AI literacy outside of school as well. So my work is in children's media, creating apps. I know part of your question was like imagination. I have a really great imagination. I'm in early childhood. But I think here I'm not, imagination is kind of thinking about what's not there already and the possibilities. I'm staying focused on where I've been in my whole career over the past 20 years, which is how do we bring quality education to young children? And I see this as maybe another possibility and thinking about how to leverage this as well.
Thanks, Nermeen. And TJ.
Hello, everyone. TJ McKenna. I'm faculty in science education, as well as now we have a new AI and Ed master's degree program. So I think one of the things that I think a lot about is within science education, thinking about sense making and this idea of like, how do you figure out and understand the world, your world? When you walk outside, you're wandering around. I think a lot of people sometimes passively just, oh yeah, that's like that, and that is like that. But when you think about, I always like to use the example of clouds. We see clouds constantly. Clouds are up in the sky. Anybody know how heavy clouds really are? They're so heavy, and yet they float around. Does that make sense? Like, is a cloud heavier than like a boat? Yes, but it's floating up in the sky, and we're all fine with that, and then we can get in planes and fly right through them. What's happening there? And if you think about it, if you go on, we could always Google those things. Now you can go on AI and you can ask some really nuanced questions about it. But you don't get that moment, that aha of like, I figured that out. I talked to somebody, a brilliant educator scaffolded me through thinking through those things and really got me to like wonder and pushed me right to the edge of what I was thinking about. And so I think a lot of these things are going to come up now when we're thinking about really what is education, what are we thinking about in terms of moving forward, like, because you can Google facts. Wikipedia is full of facts, the internet's full of facts, but like, what is knowledge? And how do we think about that knowledge over time?
And how do we assess it? Yeah, linking it to Aaron's point earlier. When you finish talking about polar bears, by the way, ask TJ how he knows that squirrels lie. It's fascinating. So coming back around to you, Naomi, I'm wondering if you could share with us, that you touched on this a little bit in your intro here, but share with us what concerns or uncertainties you have about AI, especially around access and equity and bias.
Okay, I think there's a lot of room for motivation around it, excitement about AI. And I think we also should be more scared of it, more concerned about it. I think I have a long list of fears, maybe not even a comprehensive one. But things that are concerning to me is what happens when we put AI in every classroom and those companies who provide the AI are also simultaneously involved in waging wars and affecting people's human freedom and bombing other countries without human involvement. I'm concerned about what are we doing there. I'm concerned also about what are we doing to our world? What is the point of education if we're destroying it? if there are magnificent environmental impacts that are horrifying to consider, the environmental impacts of AI, the burden of those would not be equally shared across humanity. Some of us, the most marginalized of us, would suffer greatly. They wouldn't have the funds to, some have the funds to combat those environmental costs, and most don't. So when we're teaching AI also, who is doing the labeling? Who's paying for the work? And how much are people being paid for that labor? Because often that labor is, it's happening in the global south, right? And there's not an equitable distribution of compensation for those people. And so, for people of color specifically. So who profits? Who benefits from this work? And how many people are profiting from that work financially? And how much power do those very people have? Because there's a lot of, they're grabbing up the resources to provide AI, and on top of which, there's a surveillance aspect to it. What happens with facial recognition when we're notating all of this data and annotating it, and tracking people with it? I get that we can do great things with AI, but surveillance is a concern. It can really harm specific people. Is that power designated to governmental, actors? Is it used for policing? I think the power is very daunting. Also, that technology could be used to target certain communities, and inequitably, right? That we're seeing that now with ICE. How that technology is used to target specific people is a huge concern. So I think, there's more. I have more. I could go on, right? I could keep going here, but right? But I think the point is that we're living through it, and we're living through that. Like the bomb that was, the bomb testing in Nevada that was brought up by Aaron, right? We're living through that, and we will make mistakes, and we have to be accountable to those mistakes. And thinking about how we use, like, for example, any powerful tool, any tool, whether it's, used for whatever it is, a hammer, right? If it's helpful, it can also be harmful. And we have to be mindful. We have to be wise in foreseeing those risks, and kind and compassionate, and unpack those risks, all of those problems, and try to protect one another, to create the world that we want and hope for with all of the benefits at play. That's it.
Thank you so much, Naomi. Michael, I saw you nodding several times as you were listening. I know you do think a lot about the use of AI in any social context, and that it raises significant questions about equity and justice, among other things, just as Naomi has described. So what do you see as additional issues of equity that have emerged for the use of AI in education?
Yeah, first of all, Naomi, thank you for giving us so much to wrestle with and think about in this moment. And I'm just kind of sitting in that right now. There's so many significant, painful issues that are fundamentally ethical and political questions, and ones in which we really need to think about at this moment. We really have to engage what it means to responsibly innovate, especially within an AI and educational context when we're working with often very vulnerable communities, youth, so on and so forth. So thank you for sharing all of that. I think maybe just to add a little bit more, specifically in the context of K-12 spaces, of course, in BU Wheelock, we're very, very interested in equity in education, right? And I think these ethical concerns that you're bringing up, they're deeply connected and impact how we talk about whether AI can have an equitable, can support equitable learning within a lot of K-12 spaces. And I think it's precisely this moment, also precisely for the reasons that you stated, that it feels incredibly important that we become super, super clear about what we mean by equitable learning within AI ed context and educational context, right? There's just one question of like Naomi said, how we build these tools, right? So there's these questions of bias. How do we build these tools? But even if we build like a bomb in the most ethical way possible, it's still a bomb, right? So we have to ask these questions of what work is this thing doing? Is it supporting equitable learning itself in our space, right? And oftentimes within AI ed spaces, I think these conversations about what equitable learning mean really gets focused on sort of a narrow definition of equity, an important but narrow definition, which is primarily focused on access to the technology and then also closing achievement gaps for individual students. And those are really, really important, and those are very narrow, right? So when you think of like intelligent tutoring systems, which are some of the most common tools you see out there, Khan Academy, so on and so forth, you have folks like Sal Khan out there talking about how we have these tools which can scale up teachers, the best teachers possible, infinitely, so every student can have sort of an educator in the sense of, like in the form of a generative AI tool, right? And I think that is one way of talking about equity. And I think part of our work in Wheelock is broadening the conversation from focusing on working within existing educational systems, but to even start from the premise that educational systems have flaws, significant flaws in the first place that have to be completely rethought, right? So this is where we start to broaden our conversations about equity. Does equity mean, when I think about equity, I think a lot about the different sort of diverse viewpoints, ways of knowing things, backgrounds that students are all bringing into the classroom. And there's these spaces where we really think about how those people are taking up their ideas, bringing them up, and how they become welcome within spaces of education, which is really different definition of equity than when we talk about things that are much more individual and performance-based under sort of more conventional performance metrics that we use in K-12 schooling. So part of my urging here is to think about equity, but be very precise about how we think about equity and start to expand those conversations about how AI might have a role to play. I'm not saying it should, but start to broaden this conversation about how it might have a role to play in more expansive forms of equity that start from the premise of we need to reimagine schooling first and then think about the role of technology afterwards. And this is a model that's worked really well in my past research, and more than happy to find some time afterwards to chat more about what that can look like.
Thank you so much, Michael. Appreciate that. Nermeen, you have been so involved and continue to be very involved in content development, media development for young children, media content development for young children. And I know you also think about this, particularly in the way that you design tools in media. And I'm wondering how these conversations about equity, thinking about equity as a lens, how do those shape how you approach that?
So how do we design? So I hear, a lot of people ask, are you worried about AI in education? I'm like, I've always been worried, like, just in general about education in general, so like nothing's really changed, so I'm up at 3 a.m. anyway. So it's kind of, I think to really understand our worry, I think we have to kind of go back within the context that Erin was talking about. AI really is a subfield of computer science. And of course, within a science, and I think in order to understand how we're designing and how I'm approaching it, to really see that AI did not enter kind of, or it's been around for a while, a perfect education system to start with. And specifically in terms of science education, we know that access to science, especially the grades I'm working with young children, is very, very, very limited. With young children receiving about 1/5 of an amount of science that they do compared to math and literacy. With young children only getting about 19 minutes of science per week, with only about 20% of our population getting even access to science education in general. A lot of times I walk into school and I ask them, where's the science? Why aren't you teaching science? And the number one answer they give me is, because we're teaching social studies. Like the two cannot meet. Like you have to switch them around. It's a disposable it's a disposable subject in many ways. And so when I think about this, in the context that I think about this, I think about that it's entering a world where science education was already something that was not accessible to all children. In fact, one of the studies that really kind of shaped my work and why I think it's very important to work in schools, but a lot of what shapes my work was one of the studies I read asked people and really put a percentage to how much science people learn outside of schools. How much science you think people said they learned outside of schools? Keep it in your mind. So I found that people learned 94% of their science knowledge outside of schools, from things like television shows, from going to museums. That's 6% of our science usually comes from school education. So 94% currently with this deficit of science in schools is coming from outside of schools. And so going back to your question of how I design, I think both in a school system and I think outside of a school system. So designing one, working with educators, thinking about where this fits within schools, specifically AI literacy, but also not missing that opportunity for outside as well. If I'm going to design something, I want to make sure that all children have access to it, and that means also making sure that I'm thinking about where they are and meeting them where they are. They can be on an app, they can be in a television show, and a lot of my work is not exploring specific tools, but exploring AI literacy. And so, yes, sometimes people are like, but you're in cartoons. I'm like, yes, we leverage cartoons as well to tell that story. PBS Kids is doing an excellent job of cultivating that AI. There's PBS Kids in the audience, yeah. Let's give them a, PBS Kids is doing a really great job, as it always has, in making sure that it's not just about each individual tool, but about unpacking and making sure that our children have access to that core AI literacy that they need to unpack any tool.
Thank you so much. It's a good segue, and I don't think that we did this intentionally, but the science focus is really great to move over to you, TJ, because I know you think a lot about how to do this kind of work at scale, and especially with science. So I'd love to have you think about, so TJ works directly with educators across 29 states. It's really quite impressive. I'd love to hear you reflect on what needs to be in place for AI to actually support teachers at scale, and what are we getting wrong?
Sure. Yeah, so I spend a ton of time in classrooms, and I really want to ask you all to think about your job. Think about your job and one thing that was like truly transformative or something that clicked for you. Does everybody have that? I'm going to ask everybody. No, I'm kidding. That one thing, did that come from a worksheet? Did that come from a textbook? Did that come from a Google search? Did that come from some reading that you did at some point? Or did that come from a person? Often it comes from a person. And so when you think about the kind of spaces, these educational spaces that we're in, for me, like the learning hub is the teacher's lounge. Go to the teacher's lounge, you're in there, people are sharing knowledge, people are, still, there are things that come up. And so sometimes you gotta just like share some things that are stressing you out. But there is expertise within all these professions, and I think, as everybody's been saying, it's pretty amazing the access that you can have to facts and ideas, but it is challenging thinking about, well, who chose that those are the facts and those are the ideas that are getting loaded into the system? And it makes me cringe every time I look and see, like, depending on the different frontier models, what they're trained on, it's like, Reddit's in there? Is that what we want? Like, that's scary. I was just about a month ago at a ethics and safety conference, ICI in Paris, and it was really, really hopeful hearing all of the people that are building these frontier models sharing about governance and about a lot of the ways that they're going to make them safer. Going to is like one of those, like, we can hope. But what I run into is that these systems are like, parents are asking, teachers are asking, principals, coaches are asking, like, what do we do? What do we do? How do we share these things? how do we respond to parents that are concerned? And so I think one of the answers is really need to understand what it is. When we talk about AI, are we talking about intelligence? Are we talking about transactional responses? Are we talking about like what kind of data is this trained on? And so I think that's the first thing that I always like to start with is like, how are we defining this? And what are we talking about? And what models are we using? And which ones are we allowing into classrooms and allowing our children to work with those? Because it's not all a scary thing. When you think about the teaching profession, it is a lot about thinking, but there's a lot of logistics. We got to make schedules. We got to think about organizing those schedules. We got to think about making slides but like the work that you want to do, and I think Aaron mentioned this, is you want to work with humans. You really want to understand your humans better, and you want to get to know them. You want to build relationships over time. And there's this one kind of very famous study that's been going around where they gave students an AI system to work with. And with that system, the students did 48% better. You may have heard these numbers before. 48% better with the AI system. And then they took that AI system away and tested them again, and they did 17% worse than the control group of students that never had access to the AI. And so it's like one of those things that as soon as you have that crutch, it's like, I'm sure if you've all driven around in Boston, you go under a tunnel and your GPS shuts off. You're like, I'm going left or right? Left. And you just gotta choose. And so it's like, once you start leaning on those crutches, it becomes really hard. And so what do we want those crutches to be? Do we want it to be generate me an amazing lesson plan, and somehow that's going to come up from Reddit trained data or from Wikipedia or all of those things? Or do we want to build these systems that are truly trained on what we as educators know are high quality instructional materials? And we know that if those high quality instructional materials are connected to these AI systems, you can get great responses pretty rapidly. And those are the systems that I'm trying to build for science educators and really put in their hands, because time is always an issue. And we need support to help us with those things that are really, really challenging.
Thanks, TJ. TJ used the word hope in his response, and so I kind of want to use that as our last question for the panel. And maybe we can start and go this direction. So TJ, you'll start. So I'd love for you to think a little bit about when you picture AI in education in 10 years from now, imagine it. What do you hope AI will make possible?
So I really hope that when we talk about personalized learning, I hope it's not a bunch of kids sitting in silence at a computer when the click, 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 click. I hope it's that all students have the opportunity to get personalized attention from a brilliant teacher. And I really hope that the logistics and some of those kind of lower stake things that take us a lot of time, for example, the curriculum that I'm sharing about within K-12 science, a lot of these curricula that are out there are hundreds of pages. And you really are like, I know I'm on lesson 17 and I need to find it, and then you're flip, or you're scrolling, trying to find those things. You can find that in 3 microseconds. You can pull it up, say, what materials do I need? Where's the video? Where are my slides? How can I differentiate this lesson? Can I shift this assessment or change the phenomenon? And so let's do that work rapidly so that we have more time to really personalize the experience that you have person to person. And that in 10 years' time, we all can remember back to more than just one educator who you're like, this teacher really knew me and really connected to the subject with me to make me see myself in science or math or whatever the topic may be.
I so appreciate that emphasis on human relationship. Thank you. Nermeen, how about you?
Thank you for your question. I'm going to answer a completely different question because
that's my faculty.
So instead of asking the answer, I think all of you can guess what I would answer for that question. It really aligns with what TJ is talking about. I think I'll answer a different angle of that question, is like what is necessary for that hope to become possible. And I'm thinking of recent studies where they asked parents about AI and asked teachers about AI, and they got completely different answers about what their hopes and the possibilities are. So I'm hoping for these things to happen. I think we need to really enter a co-design phase with the parents, with educators, and I think really importantly, and I'm seeing very few companies really involving the actual children in the conversation. And one of the I'm not going to name names because I'm not being paid, but if they sponsor me, then I'll name their name. But one specific company I was really excited of their work because they actually went and asked children and documented what the children were saying and had children young children co-create an AI policy. And I think in terms of hopes, I think we're all, I think on the same page as hopes, but I think in order for these hopes to happen, I think we need to really elevate the voice of different people, especially voices that we haven't heard before.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nermeen. I love that you can choose any question you want to answer.
Yeah.
I love that. Michael, how about you?
I think what Nermeen says really resonates, right? Because the moment we start involving youth in this process, what we see is that there is hope everywhere, right? There are glimmers of hope everywhere. It's very complicated because people are trying to navigate those hopes, but then are also facing immediate needs. If they're college students, they're thinking about their job. If they're high school students, they might be thinking about jobs, or they might be thinking about going to college, or they might be thinking about any number of the social issues that they're immediately facing in that moment, right? And I think, but there is hope everywhere. And I get a lot of hope from working with Wheelock undergrads, because I think that when I talk to them, there's just a sense of, yeah, this AI thing is pretty nice, but we have some really great instructors here at Wheelock who I take classes with every single day, and there's something very human about that process. And I think for a lot of the Wheelock undergrads who I talk to, that's the point of departure, rather than this is what this like really cool technology can do. And I think in a lot of my conversations with the undergrads here, I think I hear a lot of courage in asking people to pause, right? I think oftentimes pausing is seen as like sort of a fearful reaction, and it totally can be. In another framing, it can totally be about courage, right? It's the courage to resist this urge to just chug forward, right? Where in the space of computer science, there's often this thing of making things really fast and then breaking them, which can work in a lot of contexts, but in social contexts like education, it doesn't often work out that way. And I think having the courage to pause, consider all the critical issues that Naomi brought up earlier, co-design with the young people, like Nermeen said, it just gives me a lot of hope about what could be possible.
Thank you.
Well, I guess I second everything everyone said so far. And I know we're going to wrap up here, but I'm thinking, gosh, this is a little silly. This is a silly phrase, but I think it's helpful. So the phrase is the three-horned dilemma. Okay, it's the three-horned dilemma. I know I warned you. Don't say I didn't warn you. It's silly. But, okay, so there are three bulls. Imagine we're in a bullfight, and there's a, toreador there with his red cape. The three bulls. One bull is just, the breadth of education, wants education for all, wants to satisfy every child's needs, right, wants breadth. And each child, they want each child to thrive. So that's one bull. The second bull wants depth, right? Wants personal connection, wants to meet every individual child where they are, as they are, and recognize what they're bringing to the context. Wants that personal connection, specifically personal, and wants authenticity. The authenticity to really honor the things as they are. And that idea is borrowed from research methods, really, right? This theory about research, we want researchers to have both breadth and depth and authenticity. And I think this applies to education too. So that's the third bull, is authenticity. So when we're in that, bullfight, in that ring, we often handle one bull, right? We can wave our toro, like we can sort of face the toro with one red cape. And our zone of defense, we can, maybe if we have a zone defense, we can maybe handle 2 of them. We can get breadth and depth, but we cannot get all 3. We just can't, so we have to pick 2. That's just the dilemma we face in education. And it's that struggle, that tension between curriculum, and we want to match every child, meet every child, but we can't. We can't possibly do that. We can't force fit every child into our curriculum. We can't design a curriculum to meet every child's needs. And we have to do that all with authenticity. And we can meet one child's needs authentically, but we can't do that for all of them. We can't apply that to every child we encounter. So we're maxed out at 2 out of those 3 needs. And that dilemma, the solution is, to that dilemma, is for everybody to contribute something. I'm not the only one thinking about, where I wave my red cape, right? I have to think about developing something that works for everyone, and someone else can think about specific children and acquiring that or achieving that depth. And someone else can look at the authenticity. And I think when it comes to AI, the promise of AI is we can do everything for every child, personally, broadly, and authentically. And that's not the case. Which bull do we give up? We give up the authenticity in that case, I think, in that scenario. So where I find hope is in us, here in this room, that each of us can contribute some piece of the story. And if anybody says that they're an expert in AI and education, they're completely full of It's on each of us and all of us collectively as humans working together to try to build the world that we want. And in order to manage those 3 bulls together.
Thank you so much. So Naomi mentioned that her hope is found in this room. And I think the important part comes next. So the most important, so we've engaged you with a variety of things so far, but really the most important part of the forum is the next part, where we get to engage together as a community in conversation about all of these things. You have given your time on a Wednesday. Some of you struggled down Storrow Drive to get here, found parking, and it's really important that we have this next opportunity to now move to conversation amongst us all. So I'm really excited to invite you to the next part of this event. To keep this conversation going and to do it in a more intimate setting and over some food and beverage, and also learn from some of our students who will be there. So I'm going to ask you to join us across the street. So it's actually on this side. So you're going to go out the building and you're going to take a left. And most of you will just follow the people in front of you. And it's the big building, the Computing and Data Science building, which some people call the CDS building and others of us call the Jenga building. I'm sure pretty much everyone knows what building it is. And we're going to go in there and you're going to take the elevator up to the top and you're also going to enjoy a beautiful view of the city while we have this incredible conversation. Before we move en masse to do that, I'd like to just once again thank the panel for their talks. Thank you all. I hope to see you just down the street.